Broadcasting live from the Phoenix Business RadioX studio in Tempe, Arizona. You are tuning in to Culture Crush with Kendra Maples. This podcast will dive into a variety of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture.
Welcome to another episode of the Culture Crush Business Podcast. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with a good company culture. We do a deep dive into companies that are crushing it with great company culture, and we highlight the resources that are out there to help companies improve. Before I jump in too much, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Gateway Bank. We want to thank them for just being an amazing company bank in the Arizona area. They specialize in serving small businesses across the valley and the country. And we're just so thankful to have them as a sponsor. When you work with Gateway Bank, you don't have to call a 1-800 number for support or submit your loan application and then wait forever for an answer. You get fast personal service from a team who knows you and cares about you. Whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, Gateway is there to help. You can visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Bank President James Christensen. So now I get to jump in. I get to introduce two beautiful humans that I've known for a little while and separately. And now I get to bring the two of them together for a conversation that I'm really excited because I know every time I talk to the two of you, I learn more. And especially in the space where I am with helping companies improve their culture, a lot of times companies will come to me for resources and there's some taggy thing that they want to work on. One of those things being DEI, right? They come and they're like, we need to work on DEI. I'm like, do you even know what those letters mean? Right? And so then if we emphasize on the I, and then obviously there's A and B of acceptance and belonging and all of these things, that's the part that I'm really excited to dive in with the two of you today. So I'm going to introduce you both, but then I'm going to allow you both to actually really introduce yourselves. Today, to the right of me, we have Elena Joy Thurston, CEO of Elena Joy Experiences.
Hello.
Welcome. And then on my left, I have Gabe Hagen, co-founder of Brick Road Coffee. Welcome.
Thank you.
Like I said, I have these companies that will come to me and they have these things that maybe they've read online and they're like, oh, we need to work on inclusion. They don't really know what that means, but they know they have to do it. They want to work on diversity and acceptance, and they don't necessarily know how, which is fine if they're asking the questions, and then we can support them with that. With you guys, I want to hear a little bit about you, how you got into your space. Both of you have beautiful stories about what you're doing and where you are. And the balance of having the both of you today is, Gabe, you are running a business and building inclusion through there. And Elena, you go into businesses and help them build inclusion. So I think there's this beautiful, beautiful mix. So Elena, let's start with you. Tell us about you, your story, how you got, whatever you want to tell us. You can tell us. It can be more than the 30-second elevator pitch.
All right. So Elena Joy, pronounced she, her. I run an HR consulting business through the DEI lens. I'm a DEI consultant like no other you will meet again. As a formerly practicing bigot, I approach DEI in a very unique way on the basis of self-awareness and being aware that we all have internalized bigotry and it's not going to go away until we address it. So I come into companies with that perspective. And I have found, because of my background as a formerly very conservative person in a very large conservative community, I can speak the language of white conservative America. So I'm typically brought into companies where the leaders are at the intersection of personal beliefs and best practices in the workplace. And they are trying to navigate that in a way that's both authentic to them, but also good for the business. So yeah, that's the work that I love doing. It's a good time.
I love that. And was there something that really started to shift you from that conservative space to the HR consulting and really focusing on the DEI?
Yeah. So, well, coming out as a lesbian will do that. I was 37 years old. I was a devout Mormon. I was a stay-at-home mom of 4 beautiful babies when I finally realized that that thing that was always a little off was my sexual orientation. And extricating myself from the internalized homophobia that I had was extremely hard. And in fact, it was life-threatening because I had enrolled myself in conversion therapy. And so to not only heal from a very damaging practice, but also to be able to actually live this authentic life that I thought I was ready to live, I needed to create a framework to identify that internalized homophobia, to identify that internalized misogyny, or I wasn't going to live. So I created a framework for myself. I started teaching it to friends. They brought it to work. Then they asked, can you teach this to my staff? And then it was 6 months later, oh, we have an effect on the bottom line. Okay, now we have something. Let's take this to corporate and see what we can do with it.
Yes. And I love that it happened in a way where the passion came from you just needing to work on you first,
Yeah.
and then sharing that framework with others, and then that affirmation from the community of like, hey, we do need this. And then you mentioned that effect on the bottom line. So that will be a theme, I know,
Yeah.
through this conversation as well.
For sure.
Gabe, I'm jumping to you now.
Yes. I mean, I learned so much right there. Like, I'm just like, I want to keep going. Like, let's talk.
Right? Yes.
No, so my name is Gabe Hagen. My pronouns are he, him. And yeah, Brick Road was kind of started out of a pandemic purchase. Let's be honest. It was, I left a corporate job to buy a coffee shop that closed down. And then the space naturally kind of grew and evolved from just leaning into who I was, moving from 15 years in banking and corporate culture into the freedom of like, oh, I get to decide how this is going to be. Like, I get to decide how people can show up to work and how they can be. It's terrifying, first of all, brick and mortar, pandemic, all sorts of terrifying. But the best part that I've experienced is every time I've leaned into who I am or who my husband and I are, and our authenticity, it's been received with so much joy, and it's just made us even more successful. And that's what's kind of fueled our growth over 2 years. Like, we went from being this tiny little hole in the wall to like now we're looking to expand, and we have so many success stories from our employees of just like how we are able to support them. They give back so much to me when I create that environment. And it's just like every time I'm like, I wonder if this will work, where I just treat them like an adult. I'm like, holy,
You can say it.
look, they work. It works.
Yes.
Like, I pay them fairly. I treat them with transparency, and I just respect them as individuals, or I try my best. I'm not perfect. And I'm paid back in exponential value. It's insane. So that's been my little bit of a journey from where we started. But we definitely leaned into our queer identity, and that's kind of what's created, I guess, Brick Road as being this unique space. Is we're not afraid to be in what are traditional business spaces, but showing up fully as myself, like nail polish and all, you getting it. Like, I've stopped masking all of the ways that I used to have to fit into corporate culture to get that promotion or whatever it may
Wait,
be.
Gabe, show us your straight voice that you used in banking.
Thanks for calling. Oh, we can't say the bank. I don't want to call them
Make
out.
up a bank.
NDA, whoops.
I said Gateway Bank. No, I'm
You
kidding.
can say them. It'll
No,
be an
no.
extra.
As
An extra thank you.
we bank with them. We love them.
Right? We
James
love
is great.
that.
Everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, that's true. Yeah. So no, but it's true. You have that voice. You have that like.
Yeah.
You have that way of appeasing people. And, I'm going through personal struggles with even my own family, where it's like I have, since the pandemic, since 4 years of a Cheeto, like it's just been a breath of fresh air to lean into who I am and realize like, no, I'm not going to make you comfortable by putting on the straight acceptable version of myself. I'm just going to be me. And if you're not comfortable with it, then that's a you problem. And it's remarkable how most people are great with it. But those that aren't, it's like, well, then it makes me have to take a step back and question, why am I spending the time to gain your comfort? You should put the effort in to gain my presence.
Yeah. I
So.
love everything about
Yeah.
this. I love that every time I talk to you, there's something new that you're trying with your staff. And it might even be the first time. It, like you said, like, hey, they're human. I need to pay them well, take care of them. How do I balance the funds and the revenue? How do I put money aside for them that maybe you don't need it? It's better to go to that. Like all of these conversations I love. I also love that both of you, I'm really glad to know both of you now. Not that I wouldn't have loved the previous versions of both of you.
You would not have loved the previous. No.
I was really boring and didn't leave my house because I was like, I don't want somebody to think bad of my employer.
Right. And you didn't have the fabulous nail polish and the stance that you have now, and this understanding of who you are. And like you're talking about boundaries. I have a coach that I've worked with, and one of the things that we talk about is boundaries, and you setting the boundaries. It's not something negative. It's you placing value and protecting your own space and your own territory. And I love that both of you are doing that. I have so many different directions we can go in this right now. I want to go in this direction of building this community space and going deeper into the why of building these authentic, inclusive spaces, building your humans as humans, right? Not children. They are grown adults that are working for you. And then this belonging in the workplace. Elena, I see your perspective in this too, of like the why and where it pays off, right? You already mentioned there's something in the bottom line to all of this. I think that's where I want to start in this why it's important to even start, right? With Gabe, what you're doing, you're building this community. It is not just a coffee shop. I didn't just bring you here because I really like your coffee,
Right.
although I really do like your coffee.
I do too, but
That
it's not just that.
right? There's
Yeah.
so much more. So either one of you can take this, but that's kind of where I want to start this conversation of the why it's so important.
Yeah.
To start this off, I have a question for you, Gabe.
Yeah.
Would you say that now in your world of entrepreneur, which anyone who's tried to run a brick and mortar, like, will feel the weight just of that word
It's
alone?
a really bad decision.
Like, it's so, right?
If you want like vacations, weekends,
It's just not an
Wrong
option,
choice.
right? PTO, are you kidding me?
What's that again?
Not a real thing.
Right? Not a real, it's a myth. It's a myth.
Yeah.
So thinking about your life now, thinking back to your corporate banking career, 15 years, where were you more productive?
No.
Right?
Yep.
We were just talking about the mental capacity that it takes to use your straight voice, to make sure I'm not appearing to whatever, right? To assess for safety on a consistent basis, right? The mental capacity that takes is preventing your employees from being as productive as you want them to be. So if we're going to really just tie this to the bottom line immediately, it has to be based on what mental capacity are you freeing up for your employees, or what mental load are you putting on your employees and preventing them from being as productive as you want. And then the flip side of that is, again, Gabe, comparing the two experiences, even with the heavy, heavy load of entrepreneurship, of owning your own business, where have you felt the most joy?
This is something I love the question. And so I have never made less money personally, but I've never felt richer in my life. And I don't know how to describe that to others. It's like, yes, I feel like I'm working all the time, but I use work very liberally because I may be doing spreadsheets, I may be doing stuff like that. But ultimately, my joy is getting to see a community come together. And, you know, as the creator of a space like Brick Road, it's a community space where I joke that like me as a cis white man obviously knows what everybody needs. Right? Thank you for getting the joke. But people ask, how do we create it? And it's like, well, it's obvious. Like, I just listen to the community that tells me, hey, can we do XYZ? And I don't question. I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. That's what you need. Let's do it. I'm not trying to sit here and say, you know what? Women entrepreneurs really need to do this.
Thank you for knowing.
It's awareness to some extent. but yeah, so to circle back to your question, the joy I get is literally in creating a space where people find a friend or find a connection. People have found jobs there. People have found love there. People have proposed there. Like, so I know, right?
Really? Oh my God,
It was, I know there's so many cute little stories that have been, but it's been a place of so much joy, and being able to witness that is, you can't put a price on that. You can't put a value on that.
And honestly, I feel like it is a superpower of underrepresented leaders is that once they feel safe, it's not dependent on owning a business. There are a lot of underrepresented leaders out there that don't want to own a business. But once we feel safe, what we can create is freaking incredible, whether we
Yes.
stay in corporate or whether we're going to do our own thing. For example, the many underrepresented leaders that I know that stay in corporate that have found a way to find joy in corporate is just like you. They are running a framework to create connection. It's usually an employee resource group, right? An ERG. They are finding a way, once they are safe enough to do so, to create connection, and they are building the culture of belonging, and they are
Yes.
building the culture of inclusion. And when we don't make those underrepresented leaders feel safe, we don't get to results. We don't get those results, including the joy.
And I love that you brought up employee resource groups and ways to give back to other employees or the community, because that's one thing that I'm realizing. I run a coffee shop. So, like, let's be real. It involves making coffee, cleaning toilets, mopping the floors, not real glamorous stuff. But I have conversations with my staff about what's meaningful to you. How can we create an experience here that's meaningful to you? Do you have a certain hobby that you want to pursue? Is there a part of the community you want to give back to? How can I incorporate that into what Brick Road does as an overall? So that way they feel like they're not just cleaning bathrooms or making coffee. They're creating a space where we're empowering people in the community, or even them in the community, to really make that impact and that difference. And I think when you listen to people, it's magical. People are humans and they're amazing, and just the generosity that everybody has.
And it links to them starting with you, working with you. It links to those corporate companies. If they're starting with you and they realize that they can be authentic and inclusive and all of this, and they can be themselves and figure out what their joy, maybe they do have that role that they are dreaming of to be in corporate, right? We don't want them to then go into corporate and not have those leaders that are safe and open and able to start those ERGs and whatnot. And then there's these two sides, right? So that's why I'm glad you were talking about the corporate side of things, because it's very different. I mean, Karen's heard me say this, and Stephanie 1,000 times, about, think about my dad. When my dad went to work, my dad was a very conservative, white, straight, loving male, went to work, did his job, came home. There was never a moment where my dad talked about being valued and heard and seen. And if he was alive today to see everything, he would just be blown away about these conversations. But needing to have the opportunity in corporate for that growth, those ERGs and the support, and allowing people to just be human. So it can all just happen. It doesn't have to be, well, if you want to be your true authentic self, you have to go start your own business and make coffee and clean toilets. Like,
No.
that shouldn't, you should be able to grow and be your authentic self in that corporate space. How do we help that? How do we facilitate that? Like, Elena, how do you get into those businesses? Because we have leaders like Gabe. Gabe gets it. He's
Some
doing
days.
it.
I have a lot of blind spots.
That's okay. But oh my gosh, I have tons of blind spots. The stuff I have learned from you guys already, and how to say things and how to ask for pronouns and abbreviations, I still don't know what half this shit means, and I'm still learning. We have blind spots. How do we, like, infiltrate to be like at the gate of, like, we need to do this.
Yeah. For me, my framework is inclusive leadership skills. And so I start with, in order to be inclusive of anyone at work, we need to be radically inclusive of ourselves. And that means being inclusive of the internalized bigotry that we have. That means being radically inclusive of the moment that we're in. So let's be radically inclusive of the story you just told. So your dad and many, many of his peers found success in business by leaving life at home and leaving work at work,
Mhm.
right? That separation, they found success.
Mhm.
So why would they change that, right? Because that is how they found success. Let's also radically acknowledge the fact that when they were at the height of their careers, they had a third space. So in societies, we have a first space and a second space that's usually home and work. And then we all need a third space in which we can truly be ourselves. We can bring our authentic selves into this third space, right? And Gabe provides that with the coffee shop. And oh my gosh, does our community need it,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Anymore, because we need it so much, because anymore there are very few third spaces. We don't often have the opportunity. There aren't the softball leagues when our dad was at their peak, right? There are not the Elks Lodge and all of the fraternities that our dads hung out at, right? Unless they're going to a bar and hanging out with their friends at the bar. Businessmen right now don't have a third place. Businesswomen right now don't have a third place. So let's acknowledge that because we demand, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 hours of work a day from our employees, we have to give them a place during those 10 to 14 hours a day where they can actually take a deep breath, where they don't have to feel like they are the only of that in the room.
Mhm.
If we're not providing that for them, do we honestly expect that they're going to be around very long? Right? So once we can present it in that way, most business leaders understand, you're right. My dad always went to the Elks Lodge on Tuesday and Thursday, and I don't have that. And this is why I've been feeling disconnected. Yes, it is. 55-year-old white cis male leader of a corporation. It is why you've been feeling so disconnected and lonely, and so have your employees. So how can we transform that here within this culture?
I am fascinated.
My
by
mind is
this.
blown right
I'm
now.
already
Just
like, I'm thinking
whoa.
of like, what was this third space for my dad?
Mine was
Um,
my dad hung out in our garage
In the
with the entire
garage.
neighborhood.
My dad went on
Backpicnic table.
motorcycle rides,
Yeah.
and that was his space, his moments.
And he
And
was also only working 8 hours a day.
about that, yeah.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
wasn't doing the 12, 14 that we're doing
Mhm.
now. But the other
Mind blown.
I know. Do you like how I just stared at her for a second? The other part of this, though, is that I love that you're talking about this, is that it has nothing. I mean, it does. I'm going to say this statement and then caveat. It starts with every individual, their own space, their own belonging. It has no idea. Like it doesn't have a difference if you are cis male,
The identity does
gender,
not
like
play a role.
no, none of
Mhm.
that. And we're getting so caught up
In identity
in
politics.
identity and even right before I was like, there's LGBTQ plus and there's an I and there's an A. And I don't remember what the I and the A are. And we get caught up in that piece
Mm.
of inclusion and needing to know the words and the pieces and the buttons.
Mhm.
But that's not where it starts at all, which is what
Yeah.
I love about what you just said. It is every individual. That's where it starts. You have that third space. How can you have it if it's in the workplace? Or one of the things that I love about a lot of the resources that we provide through Culture Crush is now those resources that they serve as that extra space,
Mhm.
right? Men's groups, groups for kickball, groups for grief
Mhm.
retreats, like whatever these things are for whatever that niche, that third space you need to be in. But I just love that is how this is starting.
Mm.
So when you go in and you have these conversations, then they just kind of they start to get it.
Yeah, I mean, let's also be real. Probably a third of my clients come because they're already in litigation from a workplace protection issue, and they need to go to the arbitrator with a contract with me that shows that improvement will be made. Because it's amazing, in most of these lawsuits, the plaintiffs are asking for systemic change. There's minimal damages that are being asked for. They want systemic change for everyone coming up behind them with their identity in that company.
Mhm.
So about a third of my clients come from there. About a third of my clients come from conferences that I speak at, like the Two Sons Women Leadership Conference next week, right?
Yeah.
And a third of my clients come from parents and grandparents who are in the boardroom, who are in leadership positions, whose kids are now starting their jobs, because we're starting to see Gen Z in the workforce, right?
Mhm.
They're now graduating, they're joining corporate, and they are experiencing intense experiences at
Mhm.
work. And these parents and grandparents are watching it, and they're coming to me and saying, not here.
Mm.
How do we make that not happen here? How do we make that not happen in my home is what they're really asking.
Mm.
But people are more open to change and evolution and development at work than they are at home.
Mm.
So at work, we can start to pursue that safety. And that is the wildly building momentum of desire for societal inclusion that is building and building. As much as we see it, the fact is we have 7 states that have banned DEI right now. So as
wow.
much as we see this pushback, it pales in comparison to the demand that society is putting out there for inclusive change.
With those, you said 7 states
Yes.
banning DEI. If we don't find those ways around these bans and pursue these allyships of belonging and inclusion in the workplace for what these, parents and grandparents are fighting for, what's the risk if we kind of revert back to, my dad and him just going to work, non-inclusion, go home, doesn't have a
Yeah.
third space.
So the risk is massive simply because of the population trends
Yeah.
that we're seeing. So the fact is that by the end of this decade, Gen Z will be 1/3 of our entire workforce.
Mm.
So let's look at Gen Z, because now we know by the end of this decade, we need to be able to attract them, retain them, and develop them if we want to survive in the workplace. So how are we going to do? First, let's figure out that demographic. Gen Z is 33% LGBTQ+, 1 in 3. Gen Z is 49% not white.
Mm.
Gen Z is 25% gender diverse and 29% neurodivergent. They're going into companies with Gen X leaders. I am Gen X, and I'll tell you right now, no one taught me how to be welcoming and inclusive of a population with that kind of intersectionality.
Mm-mm.
Unless I intentionally learn some skills to be able to attract, retain, and develop that generation, I will not still be in business 10 years from now.
Mhm.
So that's the risk. What do you think, Gabe? What are you seeing?
I mean, I'd have to agree. The number of times, like, so much of our recruitment comes from places that aren't doing that well.
Yeah.
Like, that's where, like, I hear about staffing shortages and struggles to hire.
And you have a waiting list of people that will work for you.
I literally get an application
Amen,
a
brother.
day. And it's just like, so I've never had these struggles. And it's because, again, while not perfect, I'm trying to learn. And I'm a millennial. So, like, I feel like I've seen the generational shifts and, like, how we're approaching it. I've worked for the boomer generation of leaders, and I've worked for Gen X's, and I've seen, like, just the difference between those 2 generations. And now I'm trying to make improvements, and Gen Z is going to blow us out of the water.
100%.
Like, it's just,
And then Gen Alpha is going to burn it all down.
yeah. I'm scared, but also optimistic about the
Yeah.
future. Like, I really do believe that we're getting a new generation that's going to finally be that point where it's like, okay, we're just not going to do this. Like, we're not going to take it anymore. Like, what's that song?
Yeah.
Okay, and I
They're
really want
pushing.
to ask you, because I've been observing something in the workforce with Gen Z, and I'm guessing that a lot of your employees are Gen Z and that a lot of
all.
your clientele are Gen Z. So I've been seeing this trend with Gen Z. Everything they're asking for in their corporate jobs revolves around safety.
Exactly.
And I think back to what this generation has been through, right? All of the school shootings they've
Oh
seen.
God.
Not just the shootings, but the monthly drills that they did all through elementary school, all through high school. We literally drilled it into them that they are not safe.
Right.
Every adult around them has not kept them safe their entire life.
Yep.
And now they are, quote unquote, adults and going into the workforce, and they are picking the companies that are making them feel safe.
Mhm.
For example, one of my companies was able to get a 90% acceptance rate on their offers in this past cycle. And they really think it's because of one of their key benefits that they offered that none of their competitors did. And it was a meal service, a
Wow.
4-night-a-week meal service. These gens, none of them said no to this.
Wow.
And I brought it up with my 21-year-old because I have 2 Gen Z kids. And I was like, would you take that even if the offer was like, let's say 10 grand less? And he was like, are you kidding me? To have a guaranteed 10 nights of dinner on my table every single night, I would do so much for that company.
Wow.
Why are we at a point where people are struggling to like find food
To
still?
eat.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about safety. One of the biggest eye openers, because I've worked at coffee shops where you open and close alone and stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
One of my biggest morale boosters was when one of my employees came to me and says, "We're open till 10 p.m." So we're in a pretty well lit parking lot. So yeah, we had one person close, but one of them came to me and said, "Hey, I don't really feel safe." So I started scheduling 2 people because it's literally an extra hour of labor for me. So we're talking $15.
Mhm.
We're not talking like it's going to break the bottom line,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
but that one change increased their
Mm-hmm.
feeling of safety
Mhm.
tenfold.
And the fact that they could come to you and
Mhm.
say,
That's it.
instead of just keeping their mouth shut and being like, man, I'm going to go find another place.
There were so many
They
little
knew.
things that upset them. And then once one person felt like they could come to me and I
Mhm.
made that change, all those other things
Go away.
because I don't think they always know what they're really feeling because of all the trauma they've lived
And the
through.
fact is their brain, unless they're 25 plus, their brains are not fully developed. Like
Right.
how I managed to get through parenting teenagers was thinking about the fact that they literally have holes in their brains. So, and that is so important right now because I'm seeing so many struggles between Gen X managers and leaders and their Gen Z employees. They are fundamentally different. They are at odds in huge ways. And I felt that in my parenting.
Mhm.
And so now I'm seeing that play out in the workforce and how that's affecting things is pretty intense. But I wanted to point out something with what you said around they were able to come to me and ask for this one little change. Inclusion and belonging is the most powerful way to prevent burnout. Because when our people feel safe enough to ask for the little thing, safe enough to advocate for themselves, ask for the things that they need. And oftentimes I get corporate leaders at this point being like, oh, great. So I'm going to make them feel safe and they're going to ask for more mental health days. Like, do I really want them to self advocate? And okay, that might happen. But what happens more of the time is they ask for those little things that you never even thought of that cost almost nothing. And it
Mhm.
literally buys their loyalty and engagement, which is ridiculous, but true.
It
Mhm.
sounds so simple, but like, so one of the recent changes, you talk about how I'm always changing things. I'm always
Yeah.
changing things. Gen Z loves that. Just kidding, they don't. No generation loves that. Let's be real. Change is like, no. I
Gabe's
don't
like,
want it.
and it's a Tuesday.
And
What can we do?
no, but we have checklists, and one of the things that any coffee shop you work at, or really any food service, communication is always going to be the number one issue with staff.
Mhm.
Because I can't be there as the owner. I can't be there every day, every shift. So I don't always get FaceTime. So it becomes a burden to put it on them to be like, oh yeah, just text me, just text me,
Mm.
just text me. Well, if you're an employee and you're like, oh, do I really want to text my boss that I need a new scrubby for the dishes? Like,
Mhm.
no, you're gonna think you're being a burden, so you're not gonna do it. So
Mhm.
Gen Z thinks that
exactly.
100%.
They're terrified of being
They
thought
are
of as a burden.
terrified.
And so I just rolled out all digital checklists that has literally a shift note box where they can write anything. And I told them, I said, I'm going to check this once a week. This is for all those things you want to tell me that you think of. Just put it in there in your shift notes,
Mhm.
and I'll get to it once a week. But that way, you're not burdening me. It's not just write whatever. Write poems. Write. I don't care. Just be you and like live yourself up. And like it's been 3 weeks. The feedback has been astonishing. Literally something as simple as like replacing a drain plug. Like
Yeah.
these little things, to your point,
Yeah.
it's they feel heard, they feel listened to. They also feel like I'm using that to now provide like a weekly update where I
Yep.
summarize everything and I'm able to share when they say like,
Yeah.
oh my God, the handoff was great. I put that note and I highlight that so that way they're seeing like they're giving each other this feedback. I'm not
They are
even
really
doing the
being
work.
heard.
Yeah, you provided that
Yes.
avenue for them to be heard, take away the burden. I think about it even in relationships
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're at
Mhm.
home and there's, this battle of who does the dishes or whatever it is,
My
right?
husband.
Right? But it's not
On the record.
it's not about the dishes, Gabe. It's
Oh.
bigger than the dishes. Sometimes you got to do some damn dishes. But that
Fine.
that level, it doesn't it doesn't take a lot. You added it in your notes, but you gave them the opportunity for that space
Mhm.
to be able to give a little and not have to have it be this big ordeal. They didn't have to save it and then 2 weeks later give you an email about, "Okay, here's all the things that have happened."
Mhm.
You gave them that space.
Because
So simple.
before it was like it literally was like, how far can we go until they get to the point where they're about to burn out or explode of
Mhm.
all these minor things?
Mhm.
And as a boss, I'm like, oh my God, why didn't you just tell me about all this sooner?
And that's
Like,
where it is, because we have so many managers who are doing exit interviews with Gen Z, and poor Gen Z is blowing every bridge up they possibly can when they do these exit interviews. And these poor Gen X managers are sitting there and being like, why have you never mentioned any of this? Why didn't I hear any of this before we got to this point? We have to put in, I don't care if you're doing it with a special snowflake attitude, we have to put in systems that allow our employees to advocate for themselves in a way that they can access, specifically like you did, Gabe. Like that's you
it's
figured out the way
well,
that
we'll
they were
see. We're
going
in
to do
week
it.
2. We're in week
But
2.
it's
We'll see.
sure.
But
It's a
that's the thing.
start
Like
though.
I'm always trying to find those ways to like when we had our last team meeting, that was the number one thing was communication.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here like, okay, well, do we like I asked them, I was like, what can we do? And they're like, well, what about a whiteboard where we can write this stuff down? I'm like, okay, let's try it. Then nobody wrote on it. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so keep trying new
Mhm.
things. And I'm
There's
hopeful on this one. We'll see.
it's a level of trial and error that's
Mhm.
part of it too. There's also this level of, Elena, like you said, with our generation, like we didn't necessarily know. We don't know this stuff. We're learning how to support others. I know in my generation, you just kind of grew up. I knew that I know now, right? I'm working through trauma that my parents had from their parents. It's not their fault. They did
Mhm.
what they thought they were supposed to be doing, raising their kids, then raising us, right? With holes in our brains and all of these
Mhm.
things. And so it's just trial now. And you took that step, right? You tried a couple things, didn't work, you try again. A lot of times we'll have companies come to me and say, "Hey, we need to," that's like the taggy thing, right? "Oh, we got to work on communication." It's like, "Okay,
Why?
why?
What's
What's happening?" We do a little bit of digging, and sometimes it literally is putting some system in place.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not some giant, "Oh, we need to do this video all hands meeting every month." Like
Well,
that's not what it is. That's not what they're asking for.
making it easy and accessible.
Yeah.
Like it's not like I was just like, oh, submit this Google form if you have any feedback. No, it's like, no, every day now, instead of doing a dry erase checkboard, I bought an iPad, I put it out there, and I'm like, okay, just go onto the iPad and fill out this form. I just moved a process that they already had to do into this form, and then I put a free form text box. So it's easy, it's accessible, it's part of their routine. It's not like, oh, well, I didn't think about going to,
Yep.
because I've created an incident report form on a Google form, and then nobody submitted it, even though they asked
No.
for it,
Yeah.
because it's not part of their normal routine. It's
Yep.
not meeting them where they're at. And that's part of that
Yeah.
issue. And I also think Gen Z is getting smarter because I think they're realizing that we none of us know what we're doing
Oh, this is
sooner than
true.
we ever did.
100%.
And so, like, I think that's where you're able to connect with them is
Mhm.
just own up to the fact that you don't know what you're doing and
Oh,
you're being able to just be like, yeah,
that is
you're
the
right.
biggest takeaway from this entire conversation right here. If you want to attract Gen Z, own the fact that you don't know what the hell you're doing.
We're all making it up.
Because, and for real, like COVID showed that to all of them. There they were, 15 to 18 years old. The world freaking stopped. And we were like, you got to go to school on Zoom.
Yeah.
You got to go. I don't know how you're going to get into college now because you can't take the SAT. And we've told you for, I don't know, decades that you have to take the SAT because you have to go to college. It all blew up.
Mhm.
The facade was taken
The
off.
facade is gone.
Yep.
They know it. And they know when we're still pretending.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they have no respect for it.
Yep. And I think it circles back to like one of the things that I think inspires more loyalty with my staff is I'm an open book. If they want to know what our sales are, if they want to know what
Mm.
our expenses are, if they want to know where our bottom line is, I'll walk them through it. I'll explain it line by line as far as I know. As, because that shows them right there that I'm not Scrooge McDuck over here. Like, haha, work for $7 an hour and I'm going to go.
Has that ever bit you? Has that ever gone back bad, being that transparent?
No, they've asked some tough questions. It's held me accountable a couple of times. And I appreciate that because again, there's times where as a business owner, sometimes I will veer and shift into capitalism.
Oh, 100%.
And it's so easy to do. And don't get me wrong, there's times where I'm like, oh my God, can you guys just do your job? This is why I just want to like say, okay, if you don't do XYZ, I'm writing you up.
Right.
Very capitalistic corporate culture. But I don't want that. And so like when I am transparent, it holds me accountable because they're able to be like, well, but can we? And like, but then it also it empowers me too, because then when I have to say no, I'm always able to say no. And here's why.
Yeah.
And they understand. And I'm treating them with that respect. I think that helps.
And I see this as a beautiful evolution of you individually from your background in a space where maybe you couldn't be transparent about anything and were very much barricaded in don't be transparent about certain things.
The number of corporate meetings where we're like, well, this is coming down, but you're not supposed to know about it yet. And like, we don't even know about it. It's like, well, just be honest. Like, are you going to lay us off or not? Like, are you considering it? Like, so I can be prepared. Like, literally, it's not that hard. Treat me like an adult and I'll treat you like an adult. Like, sugar.
Yeah. I'm curious to know the other side. So I love the example of the communication and how so far it's only been a couple of weeks, but it's been a successful little piece. I'd love to know if there's a moment that was more of a challenge that you faced in building this inclusive community. I know there's been some bumps and struggles, and how, if you have an example, I'd love to hear. And then how do you push past that and know that it is not going to be beautiful rainbows all the time. You're going to have to push through that storm as well.
Yeah. So I think anytime you create a culture where you're saying it's a safe space means a different thing to so many different people. So we went through a struggle where there was times where we're public facing business. We have customers coming in off the streets. I can't control the background of every customer that walks through that door. And so there's times where I've been challenged by staff to say like, well, you say it's a safe space, but so-and-so came in and said this and made me feel uncomfortable. There's no magic barrier I can put on a door that like screens everybody at the door. So it's like, yes, it's teaching people that has been one of the challenges, teaching people like there's still going to be bad that happens. There's still going to be harm that happens. But what I can do is I can empower you to say that's not acceptable and ask them to leave. I'm not going to give them a refund. I don't care. I don't need their money. We don't need their money. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, why did you refund this transaction? That's not so that's how I'm able to empower them. So explaining that. And then the other big challenge that we've encountered, and I think this goes for whatever way you are, wherever you're at on this spectrum, there's always going to be those people that expect perfection. And they're going to expect you to be perfect all the time. I've had to find my way of being comfortable with the fact that not everybody's going to like me. Not everybody's going to think that we're doing enough. People are going to want us to do more and not understand why we may not be there. I mean, to be honest, we're a coffee shop. Sometimes it's like we do speak out on certain things, but we're not going to speak out on everything. And that's going to make some people uncomfortable. So I think it's understanding that you can't be all things for all people. And understanding that not everybody's going to be ready for the environment that you are creating. Like, we create a very inclusive culture, but by doing that, we've also garnered attacks on us. And so in my interviews now, I have to ask people, I tell them like, hey, these are the things that have transpired here. These are the types of harassments we've experienced. Not that it's a lot, but we've experienced it. Are you at an emotional state where you can handle that? Because I need to be transparent with them. And if they're not there, I just want them to know that, because it's going to be challenging for them. If something catches wind, if something gets picked up by a right-wing blog, we're going to get phone calls. And if you're not at a space where you can handle that, that's fair.
Absolutely.
And it's just that, so it's that transparency. And that was something I had to learn the hard way, because I didn't put that preface out there. And then I had employees that weren't quite ready to be in that space. They weren't quite at that point where they were fully comfortable within their own skin to be able to realize like it's not a personal attack on you. It's somebody
Mhm.
doesn't like our community as a whole
Yeah.
and has decided that they're going to attack.
And
Yeah.
it goes beyond, I love that that's part of a conversation that you have in the beginning, because it goes beyond this interview for a job, right? It's an interview to work at a coffee shop. You're being completely open and transparent in the beginning. That's what's also building the culture of your company. Um, for both sides, the company that's doing the interviewing, the individual that gets to say, I'm still going to be somebody that comes and hangs out and purchases coffee, and I'm not in that mindset and that space yet to be able to deal with a situation like that. I There's a piece of this when it comes to companies when they're interviewing. It's this moment of mask. You got to say the right thing in that interview so you get that job. And how is that going to work out for you in the end when you've both faked it through an interview?
Right.
And so you having these conversations very bluntly, very upfront, is what's also building the beautiful culture that you have. And Elena, I'm sure that this is part of the work that you do with companies, is building that inclusive, safe space. And how do you build that and start it right in the beginning?
Yeah. So I spoke earlier about self-awareness skills,
Mhm.
teaching leaders who can then model it for their employees what self-awareness looks like, sounds like, feels like, the habits, the hacks that we all need to actually be self-aware. The next step is non-binary thinking. So non-binary thinking is this idea that there's no one right or one wrong way to be an ally, to be a leader, to be inclusive. And it extends into so much. So when we think about, Gabe's never going to get as incredible of a culture as Gabe is creating. Gabe's never going to create the perfect culture.
Nope.
At no time are we going to give Gabe a trophy that says, you
You did
created the
it."
most inclusive culture,
No.
right? The fact is we're aiming for a moving target.
Yep.
This is a journey. This is a pursuit. This is not an achievement of inclusion, an achievement of equity and diversity. We will never get there. We will always be evolving. We will always be learning how to be more inclusive and create safer spaces. And so when we can start from that premise, when we can radically acknowledge the fact that we're going to screw up, we're going to hurt someone, we're going to misgender someone, we're going to cause harm. We are going to do that. If we are taking the risks that we need to take to develop our allyship, we will screw up. And there's a good chance we're going to be called on it publicly. Yep, that happens to real allies, right? And this is not a binary of therefore you failed, right? So when we can approach it from that perspective of the success that we are pursuing is a pursuit, it is not an end goal. There is no success versus failure in allyship, right? When we can start from that perspective, then one is sustainable, two, it's more authentic, but three, it allows us to start because so many of us are so unsure of that first step, just like when we're at work or out in public and we hear or we see something happen and we think, someone should say something. Someone really should say something. I don't know what to say. I don't know the words. If I choose the wrong words, I might cause harm. So I can't say something, but someone should really say something. And no one does. And that is because we're so afraid that we're going to make the wrong first step that we don't make any first step at all.
Yep.
Right?
I've stepped on a lot of turds. This mouth gets me in a lot of trouble. But it's coming from a place of like, I'm learning how to try to take that first step of like saying something. And it is hard because it does come with learning. How do I own my screw up? And how do I just be authentic about it? And every time I've messed up and I've been able to own it, we move on because my intention is never to harm. And I just own up when I do harm somebody. And I don't justify it. I don't sit here and try to talk my way out of it. I'm just like, you're right. That is valid.
And isn't that what we want from our employees? Don't we want them to have the ability to see a screw up, recognize the screw up, have it not define their entire identity, be able to learn and move on? We expect that from our employees. Therefore, we need to expect that from ourselves as well.
Yep.
And I love that this is the topic we're kind of winding down on. I was just recently on a show with David Steinmetz, out of the Phoenix Business RadioX studio as well. And his show is called Changing the Perception of Blindness, with me as his guest. I am not blind. And so having this conversation of the inclusion and the diversity and the accessibility from a very similar perspective of I, along with a lot of other people out there, I don't know what I don't know. And so if we can come at it from this perspective of understanding and openness and know that I may very well say something and I have done it 1,000 times and been corrected on how to say something the right way when I didn't know it was there was a right or wrong way when it comes to inclusion, accessibility, all of these areas that in my background and my upbringing were never part of some of our conversations, right? So coming at it from that perspective of instead of just sitting back, like you said, and thinking somebody should say something, being able to be the person that says something and this understanding of yes, there might be harm and it was never intentional. We're all trying to learn and grow in this world.
May I interrupt you?
Yes.
Because I feel like there's a really important point that we need to get to, which is the intent does not matter, period.
Mhm.
No one cares about the intent
It's the
anymore.
impact.
Just like unconscious bias, we are being expected to be conscious of our biases.
Mhm.
The only thing that matters is impact. And I love that that's the part of non-binary thinking that is so powerful is we can release ourselves from the shoulds. I should be a leader this way. I should be an ally this way. And instead focus on the desired impact we want to have.
Mm.
And if we screw up on our way to that desired impact, that's okay.
Yeah.
Again, non-binary thinking, but let's stop excusing intent.
Mhm.
It is not helping anyone, and it's not helping anyone get to the desired impact.
Thank you for interrupting and for reframing that. And I think that is a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. We have just a few moments before I do want to do one more shout out from our sponsor. Before we do that, I want to give each of you just kind of one moment of any takeaways, any final tips or advice that you want to share with leaders that are listening and trying to learn. Elena, with your support that you can go in to give companies, Gabe, with what you're doing, I just want to give both of you just like one final moment of thoughts before we really wrap up. Gabe, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the journey that I've been on, the thing that stands out to me is the hardest part of my journey was being okay with being vulnerable. Because that's really where all of my growth and change happened from moving out of the corporate world was like stepping into those spaces where I felt vulnerable because it's like, is this the right thing to say at the right time? But I think learning to navigate that is so powerful. So I just encourage every leader out there to find a space where you're ready to start that journey. And you're going to mess up and it's okay. It's just know that and move forward. And I think the world would be a much better place for if everybody just did that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. That reminds me of one of my favorite aspects. It's what I'm speaking about in Tucson is strategic vulnerability. How do leaders take advantage of opportunities to increase connection in a way that minimizes harm? Right? Like, what do I say and when, and how personal should it be, and how cringy is it going to be? Right? All of that. Yes, it's so powerful. And I felt that when you said vulnerable. Just being on a show like this is vulnerable, right? The visibility of being who we are and speaking about a heteronormative thing like capitalism is vulnerable for us, right? So I appreciate you acknowledging that so much. I've taken away so much from this, and I really have. It has like really tweaked my brain around someone like Gabe, who has created this incredibly important community connection system, and came from corporate and took everything he learned there and is able to create this service literally for our entire community. And I just think it's so powerful. And I think there are so many corporate leaders out there who can probably point to an employee and say, if I could make them comfortable, maybe they will stay. Maybe I will get to keep the gifts and the talents and the incredible magic that is within them. Because if we don't, you won't. People don't quit jobs, people quit managers. That's just the reality of it. And as hard as that is to hear, especially for me, because I am one of those leaders that lost an employee because I did not make them feel safe, right? The wound that is there when you hear people quit managers, like that's a big deal, right? And I would imagine that a lot of your listeners are probably people who really care about that, who care about things like authentic belonging. And my favorite thing in the world is gathering people like that in a room and facilitating a conversation around what's working, what's not. So once a quarter, I hold an executive roundtable for people who are trying to pursue the DEI within their company. Usually it's a committee or something. And so I gather them together and we get to chat about, this is the current state of DEI. This is what our executives are listening to right now. And this is what they're not, right? Like good stuff like that. So if anyone's interested in joining me at one of those, please reach out because I would love to have you.
Excellent. And we will make sure that we share and link all of that too. So on that note, Elena, when people are listening and they are thinking, okay, I want to be part of this roundtable or I want her to come in, I want to learn more. How can people reach you?
Very active on LinkedIn, Elena Joy Thurston. You can also find my website, Elena Joy Experience. Yeah, it's all there and I would love to connect. Your community is absolutely incredible, Kendra. They are good people.
We're building exactly what you guys are talking about. How do we be vulnerable and be authentic? And how do we grow and how do we shift? And it's a learning. And I am so thankful. I learned so much from the two of you today. So thank you for that. Gabe, when people are listening and they want to hear and find you and your coffee and all these beautiful things.
Yeah, Brick Road Coffee on Instagram, LinkedIn, and brickroadtempe.com is our website. So
Beautiful.
I've learned so much from this.
I just want to thank the two of you again for, you said it, Elena, even joining this conversation of vulnerability and authenticity. I am learning every day. How do I help other companies to grow? I'm not the expert in that space. And that's why I partner with individuals like you guys and companies like you, Gabe, because I'm not the expert in that space. Yes, I'm learning, but I'm going to bring all of these other resources into one place. So I thank everyone for listening to another episode of Culture Crush Business. And please remember that at the root of all of this, we are a hub for these company culture resources so that we can bring in the experts in this space to really help and grow, whether it's in the inclusion space and diversity, accessibility, mental health, all of these areas. We're going to be able to bring them all into one location. So we'll wrap up and we'll hear a quick word from our sponsor as we leave.
Remember when your banker knew you and cared about you? This experience still exists at Gateway Bank, the only community bank in Mesa, Arizona, serving customers Valley and nationwide. With Gateway, you get the fast personal service of a small bank with the convenience, security, and stability of a large one. Whether you need a loan or banking services for your business, they're here for you. Visit gcbaz.com/Culture Crush for details and a free consultation with Gateway President James Christensen.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Culture Crush, the only podcast out there that does a deep dive of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, please reach out to Kendra Maples on LinkedIn or email us at culturecrushpodcast@gmail.com.